Hello everybody. Today we'll be discussing IJPP 2020 um, hemato-oncology edition. The topics that we'll be discussing are two. One is hematopoietic stem cell transplant and the other one is automated analyzer based approach to anemia. The reason I am taking up these two topics are these are slightly more difficult to answer while you are doing your theory papers. All right. So if this question, hematopoietic stem cell transplantation is asked, what should you write? The page number in the journal is 72. So start with an introduction. Say that hematopoietic stem cell transplant, as the name suggests, you are repopulating the patient's bone marrow by hematopoietic stem cells. It is a potentially life-saving procedure. This will be your 2 lines of introduction. What are the types of hematopoietic stem cell transplant? It depends on whom you are taking the stem cells from and where you are taking the stem cells from. So two things, whom you are taking from, where you are taking from. So whom are you taking the stem cells from? Is it from the patient themselves? So that will become an autologous stem cell transplant. To allogenic stem cell transplant. So if own stem cell means there should be some other opposite. So it is someone else stem cell. So that will be your allogenic stem cell transplant. Autologous and allogenic. Autologous is indicated in refractory or relapsed solid tumors, especially Hodgkin's lymphoma and neuroblastoma. Remember that. Allogenic stem cell transplant for almost everything. So this is about whom you are taking it from. Then where are you taking it from? You can either take it from the bone marrow of the donor. That's number one. That's probably the most common thing that you do, that you know of at least. Next is from peripheral blood. So you can collect the stem cells from your peripheral blood. Only thing, the patient has to be primed 5 days prior to the procedure with filgrastim. This will help in mobilization of stem cells into peripheral blood from where you collect. The third one is umbilical cord stem cells. So this umbilical cord banking we have already talked about extensively. So I will not be touching on that topic. So where you are taking from and from whom you are taking from. So these are the two classifications that you can write for your hematopoietic stem cell transplant. So now that you have taken the stem cell transplant, whom are you going to give it to? So that brings us to our indication. If you go to the next page, page 73, you have a table 1, not box, table 1, where they have listed the common conditions where hematopoietic stem cell transplant is potentially curative. So how do you remember these indications? Again, it's very easy. It's hematopoietic stem cell. No, what is there in your bone marrow? RBC, WBC, platelet. And where do they come from? They come from their hematopoietic precursor cells. Correct? So remember those indications. RBC, what problem can you do a bone marrow transplant? The common thing that you will remember that will immediately strike your mind is thalassemia. Correct? So write thalassemia. You can write sickle cell anemia. Then any pure red cell aplasias. So these are the common conditions where RBCs require the hematopoietic stem cell transplant. Then WBC disorders, it can be a leukemia, it can be a lymphoma, it can be a stage 4 neuroblastoma, right? Then CML, juvenile myelomonocytic leukemia. CML is not that common in children, but still. Right, so these are all WBC problems. Then platelet problems, only one you remember, Glanzmann's thrombasthenia. So these are all cells. What about the precursor? Can there be a problem in the hematopoietic stem cell? If it's a aplastic anemia, then the stem cell is not forming into cells, right? So any cause of aplastic anemia, it can be inherited or acquired. So commonly inherited bone marrow failure syndromes is what you come across, right? Your Diamond-Blackfan syndrome, your Schwarzman-Diamond syndrome. So these are all common examples. Suppose these are all fine, but you have something infiltrating into the bone marrow. That's again your malignancies that you discussed in your WBC disorders, but you can remember it like this also. So the cells are fine, but something is preventing it from forming properly. In case of an infiltrative disorder like a malignancy, infiltrative disorder like a metabolic disease, like your lysosomal storage disorder, mucopolysaccharidosis, all those things. Then it's not a metabolite that's replacing the bone marrow. It is actually bone that is replacing the bone marrow. That will be your osteoporosis. Correct? So common causes of indications of your hematopoietic stem cell transplant is done. So now you know what is stem cell transplant. How do you classify stem cell transplant depending upon where you take it from and whom you take it from? Who are you going to give the transplant to? So that brings us to our next topic. What are the steps of a hematopoietic stem cell transplant? See, the procedure itself is actually pretty simple. It's simply like a blood transfusion. But what goes on before and what goes on after is more important. By the way, if you're thinking about this change of setup, I have made my son to sleep and I'm coming here and recording. Otherwise, I'm not able to do it in one go and I'm getting too much um, distracted. That's why. Essentially, night. All right, fine. So, yes, the procedure in itself is simple. What goes on before? You need to identify the appropriate patient, meaning you found the indication, right? But you have to prepare the patient appropriately. All right. So, what do you mean by preparation? It depends on the indication. So, suppose it's a malignancy patient, then you need to make sure the bone marrow is ready to receive the stem cell transplant that you're going to give. Meaning, there should be, and patient should be in clinical remission. There should be no minimal residual disease in a patient with malignancy. Correct? So, that is one point. Next point is, suppose if it's a thalassemia major, then the patient should have ideal control of their iron overload state, proper chelation, prior transfusion should be proper. All of those things are there. But thalassemia, there is something called as a Pesaro classification. Pesaro. Pesaro classification, depending upon three parameters, they are made it into three classes. What are the three parameters? They are ferritin, hepatomegaly, and liver iron content. Three things. Ferritin, how huge the liver is, then the liver iron content. Page 73, first paragraph, below the table. That's where I'm reading from. So they have made it into three classes, class 1, 2, 3. Class 1 is going to have the best prognosis, class 3 is going to have the worst prognosis. So this is about the preparation of the patient in a hematological disorder, a hematological malignancy. What about primary immunodeficiency disorder, severe aplastic anemia? So those sort of disorders, again, they need to be on top of their situation, especially in a primary immunodeficiency disorder like a SCID, severe combined immunodeficiency. That's a very important emergency that needs to be recognized early. And before an infection starts, if you give a bone marrow, your hematopoietic stem cell transplant, then the patient is going to have a very good prognosis. So this is about preparation of the recipient. What are you going to test for the donor? You cannot simply take stem cell and take it. That's not how it's going to happen, right? There are certain things that you need to check. What is it that you're going to check? You're going to, of course, make sure the donor is healthy, is free of all infections, etc., etc., etc. Apart from that, if the patient is ready to, give bone marrow, you need to make sure they are compatible. The donor and the recipient has to be compatible. How do you mean by compatibility? There are two HLA classes, class 1 and class 2. Class 1 you have HLA A, B, C. Class 2 you have PQR. Okay, so here P is not important as far as your matching is concerned. So HLA your ABC, then Q and R, DQ and DR, HLA DQ and DR. So this from the donor should be compatible or similar to that of the recipient's HLA ABC, DQ and DR. So these are 5 genes, right? And each of us have 2 copies of the same gene, one from the mother, one from the father, correct? So total 10. So if you have a 10 by 10 compatibility, then the chances of the graft taking and going forward having a better prognosis is definitely good. And if you have a lesser and lesser and lesser compatibility, then the chances, keep reducing. So earlier, what they thought was you should only transfuse a fully matched HLA donor and HLA recipient. But practically, that's not possible. Only 30% of people who actually receive, no, who require a transplant actually receive completely compatible HLA match. Rest 70% have to make do with whatever else is available. So then came the concept of even if it's not completely HLA matched, it's fine. If it's matched to somewhat little bit, then I will adjust. Even if it is not correctly orange, somewhat light orange, somewhat dark orange, I will adjust. Right. So top and bottom match. Girls will remember, no? Boys does not matter anything. A blue shirt and a black pant. Black pant with everything will go. So that's for boys. For girls, they are very particular, right? So they think that it's not the same shade of orange, same shade of pink. But if you keep on searching every shop, you're going to be spending your day on that only, right? But if you can compromise and if you can accept something, somewhat lighter or somewhat darker, then you can go home, wear it, and enjoy the dress, right? So that's the same concept in bone marrow. So even if it is, 8 out of 10 compatible, 6 out of 10 compatible, they are okay. Now they are even thinking of, half compatible is fine. Suppose they are taking from one parent, then it's only going to be, how to tell, haploid, only half matched. A parent is going to have only half the HLA identical genes, right? So you can have basically a completely HLA compatible donor or a matched sibling donor. If matched sibling donor is not available, it can be a matched family donor. If matched family donor is not available, then you can have a matched unrelated donor. In an unrelated donor, it's preferable to have a higher HLA compatibility compared to that of a family donor. So when do you consider a family donor? Suppose it's an emergency, you need to have a hematopoietic stem cell transplant without which the patient is going to die. Then a mismatched family donor is preferred because of convenience. The patient is going to receive the transplant earlier rather than later. Availability, that's the main thing. So now you have a recipient, you have properly prepared the recipient. You have a donor, you have matched them, they are compatible. Slightly darker or lighter or does not matter, compatible. It's okay for transplant. Okay. So now how are you going to prepare the recipient? What do I mean by prepare? It is like sowing seed in a soil. So remember this example. Sowing a seed in a soil. So for that, what do you need? You need to clean the seed. Correct. Adalla irukku. So you have prepared the seed there. What about the soil? Soil, you need to remove all the weeds. You need to remove all the unwanted insects, pests, and all that. Then you need to put some fertilizer in it, right? You need to put some pesticides in it so that unwanted things do not come and sit. Correct? Huh? So that's the same thing that happens in the recipient's bone marrow also. That's called as conditioning. Conditioning is basically removing all the unwanted cells, especially in a malignancy. You do not want these malignant cells sitting there, right? So eliminate the patient's malignant cells if it's a malignancy. Remove the patient's stem cells. We do not want that because they are already having a genetic problem. No? You do not want the patient's stem cells. Remove that. You need to create space for the new cells that are coming in. Only if there is a soil to plant, you will be able to plant it. If there is no soil, then nowhere to plant the new seed. So this is the importance of conditioning. So conditioning purpose is three: eliminate patient stem cells, create space for new donor-derived stem cells, and provide adequate immunosuppression to the host, so that the host does not attack the coming seed, and the seed does not also, create problem for the host. That is also another thing, but that we will discuss down below. So this is conditioning. There are two types of conditioning. The conditioning depends on the underlying problem of the recipient. One is myeloablative conditioning and the other one is reduced intensity conditioning. So what are these two? Myeloablative conditioning is high dose of chemotherapy or radiotherapy where you have a robust bone marrow but a dysfunctional bone marrow, like a malignancy. Okay, so you have multiple multiplications of cells that are happening. But that's not a normally functioning bone marrow. That's a dysfunctional bone marrow, right? So you need to completely ablate. So that's myeloablative condition. On the other hand, you have the bone marrow which is functional, yes, but it's not functioning that great. All right, it's not overpopulating, like in case of a primary immunodeficiency disorder. So here you need more of immunosuppression in the recipient rather than myeloablation. Okay, so immunosuppression will take an upper hand rather than myeloablation, and the doses of chemotherapy with or without radiotherapy is going to be very less. So this is conditioning. So once this step is done, the patient is going to be given the bone marrow, stem cell transplant. Bone marrow stem cell transplant is being given. So how fast do you think the stem cell transplant is going to take? The stem cell transplant, depending upon the source of the stem cell transplant, meaning whether it's from peripheral blood, bone marrow, or your umbilical cord, the uptake time is going to be different. The engraftment is earliest with peripheral blood stem cells by 2 weeks. Okay, so peripheral blood stem cells by 2 weeks, engraftment will take place. Why? Because they have a higher CD34 populating cells. Then A bone marrow taken stem cell is going to take 3 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks. So 2 weeks peripheral blood, 2 to 3 weeks is bone marrow. Umbilical cord blood cell is 3 to 4. So 2, you can remember as 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 2 to 4, easy, no? So 1 to 2 is your peripheral blood, 2 to 3 is your bone marrow, 3 to 4 is your umbilical cord stem cells, depending upon the CD34 population of the stem cells. So now you have given, you cannot relax, right? So relaxation happens after a very long time in a stem cell transplant. So you need to keep the patient under monitoring to make sure the engraftment has happened. How do you know the engraftment has happened? You will frequently monitor for blood counts to increase. Reticulocyte followed by neutrophil count will be the first things to increase. And you will monitor the patient to make sure they do not develop a graft versus host disorder. So whatever seed you're sowing should not be a weed, right? So weed might not be the appropriate term, but yeah, imagine if that's a weed or a seed, it's going to populate too much, it's going to attack the soil and it's going to render the soil unpopulable, or nothing will grow in that soil, right? So imagine like that. So that's graft versus host disease. The graft that you're putting in, the stem cell that you're putting in, is attacking the recipient, attacking the host. That's graft versus host disease. So where will it affect? It will basically affect the skin, liver, and GI tract. These are the 3 places where the graft versus host disorder happens. So in order to prevent that, you give some prophylaxis before GVHD happens. So that you will do with tacrolimus, methotrexate, antithymocyte globulin, and all that. But in case patient develops a graft versus host disease, the first line of therapy will be steroids. If steroids are not effective, the second line of therapy will be your biologic agents like etanercept, all Zumabs, Nibbimab, all of those will come. Then you will give supportive care to the patient. Supportive care in the sense your main aim is to prevent bacterial infection till the patient is immunosufficient. Is that a word? I don't know, but yeah, immunosufficient. So how are you going to do that? You're going to put HEPA filters. You're going to maintain the pressure of the room as a positive pressure because you don't want things entering. You want things going out, sterile space. And make sure the patient does not develop a gram-negative sepsis because it's going to be very, very bad. All right. All our antibiotics will work only in, in association with our immune system. Antibiotics cannot act alone. All right. So yes, asepsis is very, very important. Post hematopoietic stem cell transplant, the prognosis is good depending upon the underlying condition and how early you have transplanted. Like I said, in a subacute severe combined immunodeficiency disorder, the earlier you transfuse, the better the prognosis is going to be. Overall, 70 to 90% survival will be present and 70% can be intact survival, especially in thalassemia and primary immunodeficiency disorder. So this much, if you write for your hematopoietic cell transplant, it's more than enough. Conclusionally, you can say from 2004, we have Indian stem cell registry and their bone and marrow transplant registry from which donors and recipients can be matched. The major pitfall or obstacle for everybody receiving the stem cell transplant is probably the cost. The cost can vary anywhere from 8 lakh to 30 lakh, depending upon what sort of a transplant they require. If it's patient's own stem cells, then 8 lakh. If it's allogenic stem cell transplant, sibling allograft, then it's 15 lakh. If it is somebody else completely unrelated person or just a haploidentical person in a population, then it's going to be 30 lakh. So cost is the most important obstacle here, and the government programs should come together to help the patients. That will be your conclusion. So stem cell transplant, if they ask, introduction, classification of stem cell transplant, indications of stem cell transplant, what are the steps? You need to prepare the donor, you need to prepare the recipient, you have to condition the recipient, then transfuse. What are the supportive measures you will do? You will prevent infection, you will prevent graft versus host disease. One more point that you can add is mechanism of action of a hematopoietic stem cell transplant. So how do they help, especially in a genetic disorder if you're transfusing NACA? It can replace the diseased marrow or blood cells. It can replace the phagocytic cells that are not functioning properly. Or it can act as an enzyme replacement, indwelling enzyme therapy for metabolic disorder. What will be the examples for each? Replacement of your deceased marrow and blood cells, example, classical example, your hemoglobinopathy like thalassemia. Replacement of your phagocytes, your monocyte macrophage lineage, important example, you can write osteopetrosis. Enzyme replacement therapy, mucopolysaccharidosis, Hurler's disease. So this you can add a mechanism of action in between your 5 marks question. It could be more than enough if you write. And it's easy enough to remember also. It's not very complicated. That's all about your hematopoietic stem cell transplant. Now come to automated analyzer. Automated analyzer was actually earlier, no? I would have taken that first. I didn't realize. So what is the page? Yeah, got it. The page is 48. So in IJPP 2020 Hemato-Oncology edition, page 48, we'll be discussing automated analyzer based approach to anemia. If this question is asked, if you do not know at least something to write, then you will actually not know anything to write, because this was completely new. I learned a lot from this article. So introduction, you will talk about anemia. You will say about the definition of anemia. Yesterday we discussed about the WHO definition of anemia in different age groups, right? So 11 and 10. 11 you will say for certain age groups, and 10 you will say for certain age groups. Severe anemia, 7 and 8. Two numbers you will remember we talked. If you want to talk about age and sex percentile definition of anemia, say less than 2.5th percentile is the definition of anemia. And automated analyzer based, for that you need to write some introduction. No, say that is the first investigation that you do whenever you are suspecting a clinical anemia. This will be your introduction. Then what are the parameters identified in an analyzer? See, you get out one small strip, no? All of us remember that strip, right? It has so many parameters. Hemoglobin, RBC, WBC, then MCV, MCH, MCHC, then RDWCV, RDWSD, then IPF, IRF, etc., etc., etc. So many letters, so many alphabets, so many numbers. But what is the interpretation of that, especially in the context of anemia? So the conventional things that we generally get are three, or the approach to anemia is three. One is a quasi-morphological approach. Quasi is half. Morphology is looking at the cell's appearance. Morphology is the appearance of the cell. All right. Next is red cell kinetics estimation by reticulocyte count. The third one is RBC volume histogram analysis. If we talk about each and everything, then you will remember these three topics. Otherwise, this looks very dry. I agree. Then on the right side of the table one, you have a list of things. Diagnosis of iron status by looking at reticulocyte hemoglobin content, then hemoglobin, low hemoglobin density and red blood cell size factor, then subclassification of the reticulocyte count, then automated detection of spherocytes, automated detection of the shape, automated detection of RBC fragmentation. So there are a lot of things. So we'll go through them one by one. First is your quasi-morphological approach, page 50. What is a quasi-morphological approach? See, first thing, when you get a case of anemia, what is your first thought apart from iron deficiency? That is, you will look at other cell lines. Why are you looking at other cell lines? Because it is important for us to rule out a malignancy. More important for us to rule out any other chronic disorder that's presenting as an anemia. So the important thing is malignancy, right? So that's why you're going to look at WBC and platelet count. If either of these are going to be reduced, then it's a bicytopenia, and the approach to that is completely different. If only RBC counts are affected, then you consider as anemia, and then you go ahead and work up for the cause of anemia. So one of the approach is the quasi-morphological approach. Simple. Quasi is half-half. Morphology is cell appearance. How do you describe the cell appearance? Depending upon size. Correct. So only two things they are looking at. How big is the RBC and what is the variability in the size of RBC? MCV and RDW. Right? So mean corpuscular volume and red cell distribution width. So these two things together make up the quasi-morphological approach. So go back to page 49. In table 2, if you see, they have given a nice, beautiful table. So what is it they are trying to see? They're basically trying to say whether the RBC is microcytic, normocytic, or macrocytic. with or without anisocytosis. This is what they are trying to tell through this beautiful table. Okay? Micro, normo, or macrocytic with or without anisocytosis. What will be your thought process? Suppose it's a microcyte. All the cells are similarly microcytes. Then you will be thinking of thalassemia traits and anemia of chronic disease. Suppose you have microcytes, but with anisocytosis of different shapes. Then you first thing that you will think of any microcytic hypochromic anemia with increased RW. First thing that will hit your head is iron deficiency anemia. Correct? Iron deficiency anemia, thalassemia major and intermediate. See, remember, the thalassemia people always stumble a little bit. Thalassemia major will have anisocytosis. Thalassemia trait will not have this anisocytosis. So when you say RDW is normal with anemia, I am thinking of thalassemia. You are thinking of thalassemia trait, not major. Whenever it's a thalassemia major, they will have anisocytosis. So don't say thalassemia major when you have a RDW as normal. Okay, so please note that point. So these two are examples of microcytosis with anisocytosis. Next, normal looking RBCs, only number are reduced or hemoglobin content is reduced. So RBC with similar size of RBCs. So normocytic RBC with no anisocytosis. So it can be a normal state or it can be some blood loss could have been there, right? So some blood loss or acute hemolysis where there's not enough time for the reticulocyte response to happen, or sometimes anemia of chronic disease. So these can present as normal looking cells and normal looking size distribution. So this is normal MCV with normal RDW. What about normal normocytic RBCs, but of variable sizes? So variable sizes, then I think patients' marrow is populating with reticulocytes, right? So you will think of iron supplemented iron deficiency anemia, multiple deficiency anemia like B12 and iron in a combination, or sickle cell anemia, immune hemolysis. So these are the things that should stick your mind immediately. Next, coming to big RBCs, but all are big. There is not a variation in size. So if it is big RBC, but there's no variation in size, that means not much of reticulocytes are being produced. That should be your interpretation, right? So whenever you have, too many reticulocytes that are in circulation, you will generally have anisocytosis because reticulocyte, the size is completely different from that of your RBC. So here, if it's a big cell, but no variation in size, you will think of inherited bone marrow failure syndromes. Inherited bone marrow failure syndromes generally have a macrocytic anemia. It's not a microcytic or a normocytic, it's a macrocytic anemia. Then a systemic disorder like a liver disorder, a hypothyroidism, a renal failure. All of these can have a high MCV but normal RDW. High MCV with high RDW, then that means the marrow is trying to populate reticulocytes. You can remember like that. Or something is causing the cells in the peripheral smear or in the analyzer tube to clot or agglutinate and give rise to different type of cells or different size looking cells. Like suppose RBC is agglutinated already, then the analyzer will not know whether it's agglutinated RBCs or an actual RBC. It's just going to look at other parameters, right? So megaloblastic anemia can have, RBC agglutination can have, or if it's a hemolytic anemia with marked reticulocytosis, then yes, they can also sometimes have a big RBC with high RDW. So this is your quasi-morphological approach. So based upon size, you're approximately able to tell what group of disorders will this come under. Next, coming to your red cell kinetics estimation. The red cell kinetic estimation is ரொம்ப simple. How much reticulocyte is there compared to the rest of the RBCs? Percentage of red cells comprising of reticulocytes. So this will correlate with how much the bone marrow is acting. So what is it going to tell you? So you have anemia. If the anemia is appropriately responded to by the bone marrow, then the bone marrow functionality is good. The RBCs are either getting lost or destroyed somewhere. That will be your interpretation. Suppose you have anemia, but with a low reticulocyte response, then that means the bone marrow is not responding appropriately. So it could be an aplasia, it can be inherited aplasia or a acquired aplasia, or it could be an infiltrative disorder, or it could be a malignancy. So that will be your interpretation. A special situation is where patient is having normal hemoglobin, but reticulocyte count is too much. If reticulocyte count is too much, then the patient must be having a compensated hemolysis, like in a very mild spherocytosis. They can have a normal hemoglobin because bone marrow is working overtime to replace the RBCs that are getting destroyed. So this is your red cell kinetics estimation. Next is your red blood cell volume histogram analysis. See, for this, you definitely need to have your journal with you. If not, what I'm going to tell will not make sense in any way. Okay, because you need to look at the distribution of the diagram that I'm going to talk about. So histogram, basically it's a frequency distribution. Okay, so your x-axis will have your MCV, y-axis will have your RDW. And if you plot the distribution of RBCs with the different sizes of the RBCs, you will have something like a Gaussian shaped curve. Okay, so your x-axis is MCV. Remember that. If you cannot remember anything else, that's completely fine. RDW, y-axis, you cannot specifically say, but yeah. So x-axis is MCV, mean corpuscular volume. Different sizes of RBCs are plotted on the x-axis. And when you say how much number of RBCs are there for each of the sizes. So yes, y-axis will be your number. So that will give rise to your bell-shaped curve. Okay, so this will be your normal RBC histogram. So from this histogram, you will be able to derive MCV and RDW, red cell distribution width. Okay. So if you look at, if you go to the previous page, page 50, table 3, you have different red cell histogram appearances. Suppose this Gaussian curve with x-axis having MCV is shifted to left. The peak is normal, but it's shifted to left. That means the RBCs have become small in size. Correct? So uniform microcytosis. Whenever there's a uniform microcytosis, you will think of thalassemia trait. Remember that. Suppose the peak is same, but increased width. So increased width means what? The size is increasing, the RDW is increasing. There's varying sizes of RBCs. Marked reticulocytosis should come into your mind, or there could be RBC agglutination. So this would be your thought process. If suppose there is a fourth point, left shoulder extension or the left side of the curve does not touch the baseline and goes straight into the y-axis, then very, very small RBCs are there, and we do not know the cause for that very small RBCs. Okay, so it's in fact the RBC size are merging with the platelet size. Platelet size are going to be very, very small. Dot, 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 right? So microspherocytic anemia, you will think of either immune hemolysis or the platelets are slightly bigger, masquerading as a RBC, like a macrothrombocytopenic state. So this is your fourth point. The opposite of left shoulder will be your right shoulder. If there's a right shoulder or trailing of the right end, then it means it's extremely large RBCs, right? Macrocytes are present or marked increase in reticulocytes. This will be your thought process. So if you write this much for red blood cell histogram analysis, that's enough. There's something called as choosing between RDW coefficient of variation versus RDW standard deviation. See, again, look at the figure 1. They have given both in a nice, in a single graphical format they have given. So coefficient of variation in from the mean, one standard deviation, both sides you draw a line. So that will be your RDW coefficient of variation, dispersion measurement from either side of mean. So what will affect this coefficient of variation if you're going to draw like that? If, how to tell? It's very difficult to teach, without drawing. But drawing sometimes it does not come very well in video. That's why I'm trying to do like this. So, right. So this will be affected by MCV. That's what I'm trying to tell. Your coefficient of variation will be affected by MCV. So if the curve is going to be like this, so let's assume this is, need something to teach you guys. Bear with me. This is our drumstick. So imagine this is a Gaussian distribution curve. Okay, so you are drawing this x-axis is your MCV. All right. So if I'm drawing two straight lines from here, that is my RDW coefficient of variation. Suppose my MCV increases in size, then my one standard deviation also will increase in size. Suppose this is decreasing in size, then my one standard deviation also varies in size. So what I'm trying to tell is RDW CV, coefficient of variation, the percentage can vary depending upon the MCV. All right, remember that. The other one is RDWSD, which is standard deviation. Standard deviation, it's a direct measure. So direct measure as in, so suppose I have the same Gaussian distribution curve. At 20% of the height of the Gaussian distribution curve, I draw a horizontal line. Okay, so this is the height at which RDW standard deviation is calculated. So suppose this is a horizontal line. Suppose this MCV widens like this, narrows like this, widens like this, narrows like this. My 20% is not getting affected. Did you see that? So when you have two recordings in your small automated analyzer report, if you have RDWCV and RDWSD, which is better? RDWSD is better because RDW standard deviation is not affected by the MCV. If one point, if you want to remember this, remember this. Okay, so between these two, standard deviation RDW is better. Why? Because it's not affected by the MCV. Next, so these are all the standard things that you calculate from your automated analyzer. If this question is asked, if you write these 3 points alone itself, it's more than enough. For people who are interested, I will tell two points regarding the advanced parameters. So diagnosis of iron status. See, iron status diagnosis, if you do iron studies, then it's affected by so many other factors like inflammation, especially ferritin is affected, right? So for that, they are trying to come up with other things. One is reticulocyte hemoglobin content. Reticulocyte hemoglobin content, basically they're trying to look at hemoglobin content in the reticulocyte. Why is it important? Only iron that is available in the marrow can be taken up by the reticulocyte to form hemoglobin, correct? How can it take up? Only if there is erythropoietin, then it will be able to take up. And the maturation of reticulocyte is 1 to 2 days. So you will have a very good idea of what was the iron status within the 1 to 2 days. That is point number 1. And 2, in patients of chronic kidney disease, you especially want to know the erythropoietic activity. And for that, this will be very, very helpful. That's about your reticulocyte hemoglobin content. So basically, bioavailability of iron in marrow for erythrocyte precursors. That's your reticulocyte hemoglobin content. Next, for estimating microcytosis and hypochromia, they are trying to do with two things. One is low hemoglobin density, and the other one is red cell size factor. So basically, they are trying to see, in other way, try to find out which is a small cell, which is a less colored cell. But it has to be always seen in the background of your normal CBC count. See, what does it say? Low, it's a potential marker of, again, iron availability, which is provided by this analyzer and is derived from mean cell hemoglobin concentration. And our red blood cell size factor combines the volume of erythrocytes and that of reticulocytes in order to give you whether the cell is actually big, small, or normal. Next, come to reticulocyte subclassification based parameter. See, subclassification is simple. Among the total reticulocytes, how many are the immature fraction? Normal immature fraction will be around 2 to 16.2% among the total. So what is it going to tell you? How are they going to look at it? They are going to look at it by doing some dye methods. Thiazole orange, then new methylene blue. These are some of the dyes that are used to stain the reticulocyte RNA. They fluoresce basically. The thing is, they also stain DNA. Even though the DNA content in our WBCs are more, the amount of fluorescence is going to be different compared to that of reticulocytes. So by that, they used to differentiate which is the reticulocyte and the WBCs. And normal content, as I said, is 2 to 16.2%. Suppose you have a low reticulocyte count and you see that the immature reticulocyte fraction is also low. Then you think of a bone marrow failure, like in an aplastic anemia. Suppose there's a low reticulocyte count, you have the immature reticulocyte fraction high. That means there is a improper erythropoiesis or dyserythropoiesis. myelodysplastic syndrome, congenital dyserythropoietic anemia. These are the things you should think of. Suppose there's a normal reticulocyte count, but your immature reticulocyte fraction is high. So what does it mean? It means the bone marrow is trying to repopulate. Like in case of a hematopoietic stem cell transplant, the engraftment has happened. Then it will start increasing the immature. Only if it becomes immature, then it matures and forms reticulocyte and goes out, right? So after a bone marrow, if somebody asks you which is the first thing that comes out, then write immature reticulocyte fraction, then reticulocyte count, then your neutrophil count. Now where did I read that? I don't remember, but somewhere I read. Okay, I think it's here only. The first erythropoietic response after here only. First paragraph, the last three sentences. The immature reticulocyte fraction, which precedes the increase of reticulocyte count and absolute neutrophil count by several days. So this is the response after a bone marrow engraftment. Then automated detection of spherocytes. Automated detection of spherocytes, just remember one point. Earlier they tried to identify hereditary spherocytosis by so many other parameters, but now newer parameters are coming up which can detect with more than 90% sensitivity and specificity. If you remember this much, it's more than enough, because here, too much is discussed for our level at least. Then nucleated RBC enumeration. The nucleated RBCs are associated with poor outcomes in hematological and non-hematological conditions and in ICU patients. So for that, at least you need to know how much nucleated RBCs are present. Nucleated RBCs are normal in neonates, but not the case in children. Okay, so this point you remember. Then fragmented RBCs, why do you want to look for? You want to look at fragmented RBCs for microangiopathic hemolytic states like your hemolytic uremic syndrome. This has got a very high negative predictive value, because less than 1% schistocytes, if it's present in circulation, a peripheral smear will not be able to make out. But this specific, higher end test that you do will be able to pick up that schistocyte. This has got a very high negative predictive value. Remember that. Then miscellaneous novel red blood cell markers. Novel red blood cell markers. Sickle cell and target cells, they are lyse resistant. They go into the WBC chamber somehow, and they'll be able to pick up. And some of the analyzers are trained to, look at this shape of the RBCs. They can directly say this is comma shape, this is sickle shaped, etc., etc. So that's another thing. This is about your automated analyzer based test. So let's go through the topic once again. If that is asked, you will start with an introduction, definition of anemia, and first test that you do is the automated analyzer test. What are the things you look for an automated analyzer test after ruling out a malignancy? You can try to identify the anemia by three basic approaches in your standard analyzer. One is your quasi-morphological approach. Next is red cell kinetic based approach. The third one is histogram based approach. What are all the advanced methods? Advanced methods are to look at iron content in reticulocyte, then immature versus mature reticulocyte content to know whether bone marrow is responding properly. Then you need to know the size of the RBC. So for that, you will do a low hemoglobin density and red blood size factor. Then you will want to look at the shape of the RBC for automatic detection of spherocyte, automatic detection of nucleated RBCs, automatic detection of fragmented RBCs, and other miscellaneous things like looking at specific shapes in thalassemia, comma in thalassemia, etc. So this will be a game changer for the future. This has to be applied in our practice rather than discussed more in papers for better utility and better application to patient care. That will be your conclusion. So thank you all for listening to me. So I will try to upload this as soon as possible. Tomorrow I'm thinking of discussing genetic transmission. Tomorrow night I am thinking of pre-recording now itself. Otherwise, I don't know if I will have time again tomorrow. So let's see. Bye bye. Take care and all the best.